680 CJOB.
Richard Kluche with you. Great to have you with us. Spent some time out in western Manitoba in the Swan River Valley. This is to the west of Dauphin, to the north of Dauphin, and the Duck Mountains, the Porcupine Hills. And throughout that area, you see signs that say no moose hunting. In fact, there's been no moose hunting there for decades now. Now, some say this is climate change. There's over-harvesting of the animal and logging in the region, contributing to the loss of moose and other animals, even plants. I spent some time with members of 2 First Nations, including Pine Creek. There's about 2,000 off-reserve members, 1,500 on the reserve. And that's to the north of Swan River is the reserve, but the ancestral land base is much larger. And, you know, we spend a lot of time talking about reconciliation. We talk a lot about, well, the people I talked with, well, they're taking action.
We're losing our tradition of our moose hunts and stuff like that.
Pine Creek First Nation member John Nappieu remembers walking through the Duck Mountains as a kid.
Yes, I remember picking berries here and my dad bring me out hunting, and, you know, it was like the moose were all over the place, and you'd hunt and get a moose and take it home for the family.
Fine needle. Don't let them bite you. Don't hurt.
We are north of Roblin, near the Saskatchewan border. Duck Mountain is the only provincial park in Manitoba, one of only 2 in Canada that allows logging. The broad valleys, the ponds, the lakes, a climate ideal for forest growth. On this August day, Nappieu is showing me the land just outside the park. You can smell the fresh tree cuts.
It's changed a lot. A lot of logging. Roads are blocked from us going into some of the places we used to hunt. And a lot of open area, and it's changed a lot.
There are makeshift roads, heavy equipment parked in piles and piles and piles of trees. It's not clear-cutting, but almost. A few trees are spared in what is an area that takes us almost half an hour to walk through.
Picture this like the way it was before the logging. Like it would, you would feel welcome here. You would feel at home. You would feel a sense of belonging. Now you feel like you're like a trespasser. You feel like you're an imposter, right? That's the tragedy of all this.
Jeremy McKay is a policy advisor with Pine Creek.
This is the ancestral lands of Pine Creek First Nation, and we share these lands with our neighboring First Nations. One of them being close by here, Tootnauzi Bing, or today known as Valley River First Nation.
Pine Creek has launched a massive lawsuit against the Manitoba government and the U.S.-based Louisiana Pacific. It alleges Manitoba has failed to fulfill its constitutional obligations to protect treaty rights and has handed Louisiana Pacific timber rights without consultation and has allowed the firm to do this since 2006 without an approved long-term forest management plan.
Industrialization of our traditional territory. Some of our land users and our hunters in our community are saying that they feel a sense of intimidation coming out here hunting when they see big logging roads or big semi-trucks hauling logs or big cut blocks like where we're standing in right now. So that's one of the problems we face here.
For about 25 years now, Louisiana Pacific has been the big employer in the Swan River Valley. Successive Manitoba governments, both NDP and progressive conservatives, have allowed the firm to log the duck to the south of Swan River and the Porcupine Hills to the north without long-term plans.
Sometimes we feel like we're standing on our own. On one side of us, we have a company who's obviously motivated by profit, and then on the other side of us, we have a province who's motivated to continue the operations of Louisiana Pacific. And then us as the First Nation, we're sort of saying, well, hold on a second here. We want to ensure that we're making decisions based on the best and objective and most current science that's available. And we want to ensure that the activities that are happening here are being conducted in the most sustainable way. So that's our primary interest, and we've taken steps, including the litigation, to try and protect our interests in that way.
Richard Cloutier with you on Connecting Winnipeg on 680 CJOB. That litigation is expected to go before a judge next month, but we are seeing so many groups that have launched lawsuits against the provincial government settle. So we'll see whether that happens. Now, this was Friday. On Saturday, it was breakfast at the local chicken chef in Swan River, and many people there are obviously nervous about the jobs that Louisiana Pacific provides for the region. Not just the direct jobs, but the associated jobs. And for decades, they've felt that that's threatened, and you've had successive governments kind of give in to LP. But I met with some younger members of a neighboring Indigenous First Nation, and they are here for the long haul, and they're demanding a better deal. And they all see this as a win-win for all the parties involved.
My family, the Audi family, has been fighting for our rights, treaty and inherent rights to be respected on our lands for generations. It stems back to my grandfather, Benjamin Young. I'm a land manager and TLE coordinator with Squaw First Nation.
Young is a rugby player, a hulking man who knows his history.
We were supposed to share the land and share the resources. And in the 1930s, the federal government enacted the Natural Resources Transfer Agreement that encompassed Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba as a whole, without any consultation to the Cree and Anishinaabe nations of these lands.
Focusing on growth opportunities for his people. He knows the importance of rights, of hunting rights, but also a portion, a cut, if you will, of the logging prosperity, and a meaningful seat at the table, plus research. The data on the impact of logging, the environment, climate change, including that moose hunt. A lot of the data, a lot of the studies here cited are from the 1980s and 90s. They need meaningful research. Young says other logging companies get it.
The forest management planning team of Niso Campuino Forestry Management Corporation. It's a limited partnership, company with limited partnership between the Swampy Cree Tribal Council and Canadian Craft. So that's one. Second, I sit on advisory committee for Weyerhaeuser in Hudson Bay. I deal with LP consultations and mountain quota holder consultations. And when it comes to consultations, in the past, they've always developed a plan and brought it to us and have a timeline to do a consultation. With Niso Campuino, we own the largest forest management license in North America. So we're at the table developing the plan. We've created huge change, and that we're going to see coming to fruition in the next coming years. And every First Nation in the Swampy Cree Tribal Council has a seat at that table and is available to add their input.
The Swampy Creek Tribal Council is made up of those 8 northern First Nations, and they're really starting to take control of economic development in the region. Now, reached out to both LP, Louisiana Pacific, and the Manitoba government for comment on the lawsuit, and both are saying not while it's before the courts. I will be interested to see if it actually reaches court next month. And talking with some of the individuals that we spoke with on the weekend, you know, the moose hunt was something that, and they'd like to bring back, but now they have to travel for the youth some 3.5 hours away from the Swan River region and able to do that. And they're trying to show a younger generation those traditional ways, and they simply can't do it right now. There are others, and we've talked to David Chartrand, the president of the Manitoba Métis Federation, who say that, listen, we should be able to assert our rights to harvest moose in the area, that their numbers indicate that the moose have made a comeback. And some people that I spoke to have said that as well, but there's still a moratorium on moose. You can weigh in on this, 204-780-6868. When we come back, we're going to be joined by somebody that has gone undercover and spent some time in the Duck Mountains, because there are a lot of people within the environmental movement that say there should not be logging at all in a provincial park. If you know the area, if you're out in Swan River, you can certainly join us as well. But hunters too, and moose, whether it's threatened. We've asked the wildlife people if they would like to come on and join us. The one thing that I've found in studying this and asking the questions, that there's not enough research being done. A lot of the data is 1980s and 1990s. There's not a lot of good material in the last 10 to 15 years. Richard Cloutier with you. Stay with us. It's Connecting Winnipeg. We're outside the perimeter right now on 680 CJOB. Eric Rader, how long have you been with the Wilderness Committee here in Manitoba?
It'll be 17 years in a couple of weeks.
What do you folks do?
We work on wild spaces, defending nature, putting up ideas for people to look at, how we best care for the world around us, because that's the only thing that really cares for us is nature and our ecosystems.
We've known each other probably for those entire 17 years, and I know your commitment. And while I spent some time in the Duck Mountains on Friday and Porcupine on Saturday, tell us about your July, because you went kind of, stealth, and you went backpacking in that area. Tell us what you did.
I took my touring van and all my camera gear and maps and laptop and spent 7 days traipsing around the ducks. Ended up 1,600 kilometers driving out in there, and maybe 40 kilometers of backpacking with my camera gear to document what's happening both in Duck Mountain Provincial Park, but also in the area surrounding the ducks, auditing, logging operations. Probably there were more than 20 clear cuts that I documented and recorded, violations and, issues that we saw with how the ecosystems are being cared for and how the park is being kind of abandoned by the Manitoba government.
Louisiana Pacific, which has those logging rights, and what many people find outrageous is there hasn't been an approved kind of long-term strategy since 2006 for this. This has just been given order in council, and the last one was in December of last year. So there hasn't been an overall assessment of the impact of logging on the Duck Mountains, and both the New Democrats and the Progressive Conservatives can share the blame on that. But when you talk about clear cutting, what I saw up there was almost clear cutting, that they would leave one or two trees. So when someone like Eric Rader says you're clear cutting, they can come back and say, no, it's not clear cutting, but they've really only left a handful of trees otherwise.
Yeah, some of those leaves are there for reseeding efforts. There's a guideline that goes back to 1989 that says you're not supposed to have a line of sight further than 400 meters, with the idea that a cow moose doesn't want to be more than 200 meters from the edge of a forest. So sight lines are really important, and the reason that they're really important is predation. Moose are also getting hunted by not humans only, but wolves. So the wolves having a straight sight line that they can see a moose in the distance, that makes moose nervous. And as soon as we put in larger clear cuts, then we cut down the amount of area that moose can be using as habitat. So, as you said, you've seen a couple of areas, and they do leave blocks. And then sometimes maybe the logging companies, while they're in the bush, because no one's ever going to walk 40 kilometers into the bush with GPSs to document whether or not there are violations, you'll find major violations. So the new technology, working with a GPS watch, which is the easiest thing for me, but also putting a drone up and being able to see what's happening around me without the hours and hours of slogging, we're really able to get a feel for just how bad the destruction of the ducks is, both inside the provincial park and the general Duck Mountain region.
And when you add that up, what does that do to that whole ecosystem in your view?
Well, the craziest thing is that when you go onto a Google map, of course it's radio, I can't give you the image, but go into Google Map and then click satellite and zoom out, and you'll see these piles, the two that you talked about, the ducks and porcupine, these big chunks of forest in the middle of developed agricultural land, and Riding Mountain to the south of it. That chunk of the ducks is unique. It's like nothing else anywhere on the planet. And what we've decided, the governments of the past, going back again to decisions made in the 70s and 80s, they've decided that Riding Mountain is protected, so we don't have to worry about the ducks. So we'll just log it. But that's not the case. Science, in fact, is the opposite. Louisiana Pacific admits in their filings, the Manitoba government calls it out, the federal government calls it out, that the ducks are unique. And we are absolutely destroying the integrity of this old forest by the amount of logging that we're allowing to happen in the ducks. And of course, we should never be destroying the integrity of the ecosystem inside a provincial park like we're doing.
How important is it that these lawsuits succeed?
Yeah, the lawsuits, of course, the discussions about the park logging, which is the only piece that I actually focus on my auditing for the most part. These lawsuits are absolutely about decision-making and reconciliation and the free, prior, and informed consent of Indigenous communities. These are the moose hunt isn't about meat in the freezer only for a community. The moose hunt is about culture. It's about teaching. It's about building community. It's about the feeling of being attached to the land. So the communities being told by logging corporations that this is what their plan is for the next 4 years. Here's the map. What do you think? You get back to us in 3 weeks. That concept is against, reconciliation and against what, good thinking people in this province want to see. That's not the right path, but it's a relic from our past that we need to change. And so 2 First Nations have stepped forward and said, no, we're going to make this work. We're going to get this right. And I, really support their efforts to ensure that they're at the table and they are the first people that are making the plan and deciding how a forest area like the ducks should be managed.
Eric Rader, look forward to seeing what you've collected. What's the website for people?
wildernesscommittee.org/Manitoba, and some of the data will be up within the next week, I guess, and lots of different pieces of this whole picture. The record old trees found, the biking and hiking trails that are about to be bulldozed and clear-cut and lost inside Duck Mountain Provincial Park. A lot of things for people to take a look at and get a feel for the ducks.
Eric, appreciate the time. Thanks for doing what you do.
Thank you.
Eric Rader of the Wilderness Committee joining us live on 680 CJOB.